Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the American Bar Association Antitrust Law section. My name is Anora Wang. Today's topic is, can pay transparency create antitrust risks or compliance opportunities? Conversation with economist Dr. Zhang. Pay transparency laws aim to close pay gaps and promote fairness, but they also raise new questions for competition laws. How do disclosure and benchmarking affect wage-setting dynamics? Could transparency inadvertently facilitate coordination? And what frameworks can help employers balance compliance with both pay equity as required or aimed for the pay transparency laws and also antitrust laws? Joining me today is my co-host, Alicia Downey. Hi, Alicia.
Hi, Anora. I'm looking forward to today's episode.
Could you introduce our guest today?
Yep, it'd be great to do so. Zhang is a director in the Washington, D.C. office of consulting firm Resolution Economics, where he provides economics and econometric analyses on cases involving employment discrimination, wage and hour, class actions, and labor antitrust issues. He also advises employers on pay equity studies, compensation benchmarking, and compliance with emerging pay transparency regimes. Yi's work sits at the intersection of data, economics, and public policy, which makes him the perfect guest to discuss how pay transparency and competition interact in the labor market.
Great. Without further ado, welcome to the program.
I'm glad to be here.
So from your standpoint, could you just lay the ground for us? What explains the rapid spread of pay transparency laws across various states in the United States?
So first of all, thank you for having me here. Pay transparency, as the name suggests, is a set of laws that requires employers to disclose compensation-related information to job applicants or to employees in certain circumstances. And in the last 5 years, we see a huge wave of these pay transparency laws enacted in various states in the United States. I think, by my counts, I think it's 14 states plus DC. As of now. And even though that the specific forms and shapes of these disclosure requirements are a little different, they are all driven by this belief that the more information about the pay on the market will empower lower earners to negotiate for higher pay, so will help to close the pay disparities across gender and races that has been persistent on the U.S. labor market.
I think, as already explained, one of the policy goals is to promote, through pay transparency, to promote pay parity. But another goal that I think that's intended, or at least argued, is that pay transparency laws could also improve market efficiency. What are the theoretical mechanisms by which disclosure could change how wages are determined and negotiated? And are there any tensions between the policy goals that we just mentioned?
I'm actually glad that you mentioned wage determination, because one important aspect of the potential impact of the pay transparency law is how the law will influence employers' hiring and the pay decision-making process. And of course, the public discussion about pay transparency are overwhelmingly about the primary driver of it, which is to reduce the gender pay gap. And if we still remember I think it's more than 15 years ago, maybe the Lilly Ledbetter equal pay case, it started with she learning about the coworkers' pay information. But meanwhile, I think sometimes we sort of neglect the other aspects of the potential impact is how employer now anticipating that any pay change will be disclosed to the public, how this will influence their their pay determination process. There are some preliminary empirical evidence in labor economics. It's not so much because the laws are pretty recent. And we see a lot of estimates that shows that, yes, the primary goal of the law has achieved, meaning that there is a rapid closing of in gender gap in pay in places where these laws are enacted. But meanwhile, some other studies have suggested that this achievement of the equity is actually at the expense of a overall low wage level. And I think later on we're going to get into why that's the case and how to better design a pay transparency regulation to avoid that.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the case before was that, like, someone found out somehow, for instance, me as a woman, I'm getting only 87 cents per dollar my male counterpart may be getting. So from an empirical perspective, I guess, and from you as economists, we're interested to know, are there models or early data that suggest that the pay transparency laws or rules are actually working to actually increase pay parity and also improve market efficiency, the two goals that we talked about?
Yeah, I think I mentioned a little bit, there are some preliminary empirical evidence that show that there is a significant improvement in terms of closing the gender gap in places where these laws are enacted. So the nice thing about for economists, the nice thing about these different states as different laws is provide us some sort of comparisons that we can make to see, the states that has different laws and what's the impact of those in terms of reducing the gender pay. But again, as another aspect of it is unfortunate, a little bit of unfortunate, I think, is an unintended consequence of this of these types of laws is sometimes we see that the gap is closing, but meanwhile, we see a drop in the overall wage level because of the passing of these laws.
And now to get a little better understanding of the comparison among the states that have enacted these sorts of statutes, when you look at the leading states, perhaps the earliest adopters, how do you think their disclosure rules differ in their economic significance? So, for example, do certain approaches like posting ranges externally versus sharing internally have stronger effects or on labor market dynamics?
It's actually a very good question because we do see this huge variation across states in terms of the shapes and forms of these laws. For example, California requires any employers to post a pay scale for any positions in their job postings. But meanwhile, the coverage is only for employers with 15 or more employees, while New York, the threshold is 4 employees. And also some pay transparency laws only require the pay information being disclosed to candidate who has already passed the first round of interview. So this actually brings about the type of transparencies and sort of a differential impact of these different types of transparencies. So broadly speaking, we see 3 major types of transparencies here. So one is what we call a horizontal transparency, where pay information were disclosed to coworkers that doing similar jobs within an organization. And the other type is what we call a vertical transparency, where the transparencies are for different levels of seniorities within an organization. So essentially, you will know what's your boss's pay and so on and so forth. And then the third form, which is cross-firm transparency, where the firms and workers get to see their competitors, their competing firms' pay information. And as a matter of fact, that these 3 different types of transparencies has a different implication and different effects on workers, as a lot of the researchers has already suggested.
And what are some of the effects that they have on the workers in particular, and the employers as well? Do we see them more job mobility, for example? Any other effects?
So for the cross firm transparency, we do see that it reduces the information friction on the labor market, sort of improve job mobility. So that's generally regarded as sort of a better way to make pay information transparent. But on the other hand, if you think about horizontal transparency, meaning that pay information across coworkers that work in a similar position within the same organization, sometimes this type of transparency might have, and there are some early research that has suggested that it does have unintended consequences. So here's essentially how this thing will work out is because of the pay transparency, now the employer realized that if a employee is asking for a raise, they cannot hide that raise from other employees or job applicants anymore. So a raise to a marginal worker implies that the employer will have to give raise to everybody who come to the employer to renegotiate their wage because of the disclosure of these pay information. And under that circumstances, many employers will essentially say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to give you a raise because I cannot afford it. So essentially, even though on the face that pay transparency in this particular type of transparency, people think they might improve the bargaining position of the workers, but because of these incentive effect, because of this wage setting behavior of the employer in anticipation of the pay transparency, we might actually see the bargaining power shift to the employer side. Essentially, you're moving toward a more like a monopsony market where the employer is actually setting the wage. And the consequence of that, of course, is that you have a overall lower wage level compared to the competitive level, even though you have a more equal wage distribution.
It sounds like a truly mixed bag right now. Do you think over an increased passage of time, we'll start to see a clearer picture of the effects?
Yes, because again, these laws are fairly new, and there are still many states, there's new laws to come. But I think with time passing, and especially with more research, we do need to see a lot more research in this field in terms of we have so many different types of pay transparency. And as I have mentioned, each specific type of transparency might have different impact on workers. I'll give you another story, sort of another line of research that people has conducted when it comes to this horizontal transparency is actually the impact of this pay transparency goes beyond the wage. Is if lower earners somehow learned that there are similar workers in the same organization that earn more salary than them, there might be a morale effect, and these workers might choose to reduce their effort level and even quit their work and reduce their productivity. Of course, this would drive down the productivity. So these are all consequences that we do need to take into account when we design a better pay transparency regulation.
Thank you for painting that complex picture of all things in place and sort of sometimes working against each other. So one of the tension that we already talked about is the conflicting policy goals up to pay parity and also perhaps market efficiency. Some economics theory or argument is that transparency can improve efficiency, but also facilitate tacit coordination amongst the different employers. How can wage information from public postings or compensation surveys reduce uncertainty in ways that might blunt the competition for labor?
So I think sharing wage information are pretty sensitive to antitrust regulatory agencies, and everybody is sort of are very aware of that. And I want to point out that the type of information revelation, the type of disclosure with the passing of the pay transparency law sometimes can be a lot more detailed than what the traditional market research or salary survey can give you. Because if you look at those job postings, not only you have a specific number attached to those jobs or job titles, but also in the job postings, you have very detailed information about the tasks associated with certain job, qualifications associated with certain job, education requirement, experience requirement. And all of those, together with the specific pay information, this is revealing a lot of a pricing sort of a knowledge to the market. And this type of information sharing under the pay transparency law will inevitably sort of raise concerns of the regulatory agencies, and of course to have the firms to pay more attention to these aspects in order to prevent any type of market concentration or market power.
Yeah, as you mentioned, information sharing is sensitive, right? Especially if it's granular, detailed, and not aggregated in any way. But there are other things that need to be taken account of. For instance, market conditions. What market conditions determine whether disclosure help workers to get better pay, or potentially actually harm workers when employees can potentially or tacitly collude to keep the wages at a lower level?
That's a very good question. Actually, that speaks directly to a very similar question: is what type of a market are more likely to generate monopoly power, right? So so the traditional story is a one company town. The traditional story would be you have a bunch of hospitals in the same town that hiring most of the nurses or the teachers market. But other than that, we also have if this is a market that characterized by a lot of search and matching frictions. There's a lot of costs associated with moving or commuting. If there are barrier to entry or barrier to switch jobs, for example, occupational licensing, and all of those are factors that might contribute to worsen the anti-competitiveness concern when it comes to dealing with the pay transparency law.
Now, turning to a slightly different topic, the Antitrust Guidelines for Business Activities Affecting Workers, issued in January 2025, refers to something called false earning claims. So what do false earning claims mean from an economic standpoint? And from a data perspective, why is accuracy so important?
Accuracy in advertising your pay information associated with the job in those postings are very important, because any type of misrepresentation of the salary or as a compensation that you're going to be providing to those applicants going to have serious consequences in terms of a market allocation of resources. So we will have people that has skills probably not perfect match to the position, got hired because the worker are falsely believe that they're going to get a higher pay, even though the fact is not. And that's going to essentially create sort of market frictions in there. And as we know, any type of market friction going to give rise to potential monopoly power in the market. So this is an area where I think the guidelines has demonstrated that it's an area where the regulatory agency will pay attention to.
And it's yet another complicating factor. If you were trying to design some sort of a way to assess on an empirical basis whether the pay transparency data is improving competition or not, what other indicators would you track?
So I think this speaks to again, more research is needed in this field. We want to see more estimates. We want to see how exactly the pay transparency law and various types of pay transparency law will help to close the earnings gap as they intended to, and whether that's more of a short-term game or it actually has long-term sustainability. And meanwhile, we also need to keep track. We also need to track the indicators that will tell us something about these unintended consequences that I pointed out. What about the overall wage level compared to the perfect competition condition? So this actually brings back. So there is actually a parallel if you think about the wage setting under pay transparency and the monopsony wage setting, right? So in the classic monopsony model, it assumes that that employers are pay homogeneous worker in the exact same pay, and in the wage setting context under full transparency, the company cannot sort of do price discrimination. They cannot pay marginal workers a little bit higher, because if you do that under full transparency, everybody's going to know, and everybody's going to come to you to renegotiate. So your choice would be, okay, I'm going to pay everybody low salary, but everybody the same salary. So there's a sort of interesting parallel in there, and that also speaks to why we wanted to, why the topic today, and how we can tie these two aspects together. And hopefully the better transparency law will not only close the gap, but also boost competition on the labor market.
Now, switching out the hat of a neutral researcher that you might have, now sitting there as an advisor sometimes to companies who really try to comply. How would you design or advise a company to design a disclosure regime of their pay that would maximize the fairness, but also efficiency of the market, and just under the antitrust laws, minimize the collusive risk?
So that's a lot of requirements, and pay transparency laws has very complex effects on workers, as we have discussed. So there's no silver bullet in there, but from what we have discussed, we see that maybe complete transparency horizontally might not be the best solution because of these unintended consequences. Meanwhile, the vertical transparency, the cross-firm transparency might help to reduce the information gap, reduce the friction on the labor market, and improve the competition. And meanwhile, we do need to know similar situated employees' earnings, and we might be able to do that in a sort of a less detailed way. I don't know, maybe some structured salary band for broadly defined jobs or experience levels, so on and so forth. So there are also, I think there are some proposals out there. There are many proposals out there. Some of them are related to some tax credit that the company might be able to get if they sort of disclose certain information or submit sort of certain pay equity reports and so on and so forth. So there are some potential solutions out there, and we economists were still figuring out.
That's fascinating, and certainly more to watch in this field, and maybe more to talk about in the future. Now, let's switch gears a little bit. And in this program, once we get a chance to sit down with you, we always want to take this opportunity to learn about you as a person a little bit. Now, would you tell us a little bit about yourself that if people who had only worked with you professionally would not know?
Actually, I spend a lot of time on dogs. I'm a lover of Labrador Retriever. That not only that I have two big Labrador Retriever at home, I also sort of participate in the Labrador Retriever dog show and breeding community. I'm not a breeder, but I have a lot of friends who are in the community, and I live in the DC area. As a matter of fact, the world's largest Labrador Retriever show every April is actually called Potomac Labrador Retriever show is actually in Frederick, Maryland, which is only 45 minutes from here. So I go there to watch the show and hang out with my friends. So that's I waste a lot of time on that. So.
Well, do your dogs have fancy names like a lot of show dogs have?
They do. When I register them, they have long names. So one of the black lab's name is because he's black, and then he has some dots in there. It look like a night sky. I came from the city of Beijing in China. There's a quite famous Chinese popular song. It's called "One Night in Beijing," and that is his name. And then I have a yellow lab. His name is Barney, and his full name is Mr. Barney Goes to Washington, because he came from Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas. Yeah.
Now, since both dogs go to dog shows, I think some would argue they qualify as workers. Do you pay them equally with trees and
I pay them
and do they
equally
know
with
each
the-
other and their pay respectively?
we pay them equal. I pay them equally with treats, a lot of treats.
Now let's get another chance to talk a little bit about you personally. Let's go to a section called Curious Hat.
And now it's time for the Curious Hat.
The rules of the game are very simple. I'm going to draw a random surprise question out of a virtual hat, and we'll see what it reveals about you. So here is your question. What is your favorite smartphone app on your phone that does not include email or other work-related apps?
I think I spend a lot of time on Twitter or X. It really becomes the way of consuming news. Instead of going to different newspaper websites, I use that as my sort of aggregator for news.
So that's what you use to kill time in airports.
Oh yeah, a lot of time in the airport. Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for being on our Curious Amalgam. This was a very interesting conversation. And for listeners out there, tune in to next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.